The water turned red in seconds. Dawn Brancheau's desperate screams echoed through the concrete walls of SeaWorld Orlando as 12,000 pounds of pure muscle dragged her into the killing depths. Families eating their romantic lunch through the underwater viewing windows watched in absolute horror as their magical Dine with Shamu experience became a bloodbath they'd never forget. February 24th, 2010, 2:30 p.m. In exactly 39 minutes, one of SeaWorld's most beloved trainers would be dead. The massive orca named Tilikum had Dawn by the throat. Her body twisted and thrashed like a broken doll as 6 tons of apex predator played with his human prey. Children screamed in terror. Parents covered their eyes in shock. But nobody could look away from the carnage unfolding beneath the crystal surface. Dawn's blonde ponytail floated in the crimson water like golden seaweed. Her arms went completely limp. Her legs stopped kicking, then deadly silence. She had no idea when she kissed her husband goodbye that morning that she was living her final day on Earth. She had no idea that the gentle giant she'd worked with for years was about to become her savage executioner. But she should have known. The warning signs were everywhere because this wasn't Tilikum's first kill. He had murdered before. But to understand how a childhood dream became a death sentence, we must go back to the beginning. 4 hours earlier, Dawn Brancheau woke up excited for another day at her dream job. "I love you," she whispered to her sleeping husband. Those were the last words he'd ever hear her speak. 3 hours earlier, she was singing in the shower, planning her weekend with Scott. They were talking about starting a family, about growing old together. Time was running out, and she didn't even know it. 2 hours earlier, Dawn was laughing with her fellow trainers, sharing coffee and stories in the break room. She was glowing with happiness. Death was already stalking her through the hallways. 1 hour earlier, she was reviewing her safety protocols for the Dine with Shamu show. She checked every box, followed every rule, but the rules couldn't save her from what was coming. 30 minutes earlier, she was performing flawlessly for the captivated audience. Families applauded her grace and skill. They had no idea they were watching her final performance. 15 minutes earlier, the show ended to thunderous applause. Dawn took her bow with a radiant smile. Everything seemed perfect. But something had already changed in Tilikum's cold, calculating eyes. 10 minutes earlier, Dawn was lying peacefully at the pool's edge for their routine relationship session. Her feet dangled innocently in the water. She was completely vulnerable. Tilikum approached slowly, deliberately, like a predator sizing up his prey. 5 minutes earlier, she was still stroking his massive head, whispering sweet words to the killer whale. "Good boy, Tilly. You're such a good boy." Her voice was full of love and trust. 2 minutes earlier, Dawn was still alive, still breathing, still believing in the magic of human-animal connection. 1 minute earlier, witnesses saw Tilikum's demeanor suddenly shift. His movements became erratic, aggressive, dangerous. Then the beast struck without mercy. But here's the most terrifying truth of all. This was no freak accident. This was the inevitable conclusion to a horror story that began 27 years earlier. The warning signs weren't just there. They were written in blood. Dawn Brancheau was living every marine biology student's impossible dream. At 40 years old, she was the embodiment of everything SeaWorld wanted their trainers to be. Stunningly beautiful, magnetically charismatic, and completely devoted to the massive creatures she worked with every single day. For 16 incredible years, she had poured her entire heart and soul into marine mammal care and conservation. She wasn't just another employee clocking in for a paycheck. She was a true believer in the magic. Every single morning, Dawn would arrive at SeaWorld Orlando before the sun came up, practically bouncing with excitement to spend another day with her beloved whales and dolphins. Her colleagues lovingly called her the Orca Whisperer because she possessed an almost supernatural ability to calm even the most aggressive and unpredictable animals with nothing more than her gentle voice and loving touch. She had pure magic in her hands and boundless love in her heart. Dawn and her devoted husband, Scott, had been blissfully married for just 6 wonderful years, and they were actively planning to start their own family together. But among all the magnificent creatures at SeaWorld, Dawn had one very special favorite, one deeply personal connection that would ultimately cost her absolutely everything she held dear. His name was Tilikum, and he would become her killer. Dawn had worked intimately with the massive bull orca for years, without a single incident or moment of concern. She trusted him completely and unconditionally. She would fearlessly lie beside his enormous head, run her gentle hands along his scarred and weathered body, and whisper intimate secrets that only he could hear. To Dawn's loving heart, Tilikum wasn't a dangerous wild predator. He was precious family. She passionately defended him when other trainers questioned his increasingly aggressive behavior. She fought for him when management wanted to isolate him from human contact. She loved him deeply when everyone else around her was beginning to fear him. That fateful morning, Dawn had absolutely no idea she was walking directly into her own brutal execution. She had no idea that her boundless kindness and trust would be repaid with savage violence. She had no idea that the whale she considered her closest friend had already killed twice before, because SeaWorld's corporate executives had never told her the complete, horrifying truth about Tilikum's dark and bloody past. And that deadly lie would cost Dawn everything: her dreams, her future, and ultimately her life. In the freezing waters off Iceland in 1983, an innocent 2-year-old orca calf was violently ripped away from his loving family pod. Baby Tilikum watched helplessly as his mother and siblings disappeared forever beneath the dark waves, while heartless humans dragged him into a life of captivity and exploitation. He would never see the vast, wild ocean again. But Tilikum wasn't destined to be just another performing whale. He was destined to become a cold-blooded monster. His first taste of human blood came in 1991, at Sealand of the Pacific in Canada. 20-year-old marine biology student Kelty Burns accidentally slipped into the orca pool during a routine show. 3 orcas, led by the increasingly aggressive Tilikum, immediately surrounded her thrashing body and dragged her underwater in a coordinated attack. For 10 agonizing minutes, while hundreds of horrified spectators screamed desperately for help, the whales played with Kelty's dying body like it was nothing more than a toy. They passed her lifeless form between them, taking turns diving deep and surfacing with their victim clenched in their massive jaws. Kelty Burns drowned in terror and agony. Tilikum had officially tasted human blood, and he liked it. Instead of being immediately retired or relocated to a sanctuary, Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Orlando for millions of dollars. The corporate marketing machine immediately began promoting him as a gentle giant and ambassador for his species. They made him their primary breeding bull, using him to father dozens of captive orcas. They put unsuspecting trainers in the water with a proven killer. In July 1999, Tilikum killed again with even more disturbing brutality. Daniel Dukes, a deeply troubled man who had snuck into SeaWorld after closing hours, was found floating dead in Tilikum's pool the next morning. His naked body was horrifically mutilated. His genitals had been completely bitten off. Tilikum had stripped him naked and played with his corpse like a gruesome toy throughout the night. 2 confirmed deaths, 1 increasingly psychotic whale. But SeaWorld's shows continued without interruption. The corporate executives told their trusting trainers that Tilikum was completely safe to work with. They claimed the previous incidents were tragic accidents caused by human error and bad luck. They created elaborate safety protocols that gave everyone a false sense of security. They were lying through their teeth. By February 2010, Tilikum had spent 27 torturous years in concrete captivity. 27 years of psychological imprisonment, sexual exploitation, and mental torture. His once proud dorsal fin had collapsed completely from chronic stress and depression. His teeth were worn down to bloody nubs from obsessively gnawing on the concrete walls of his tank. His powerful mind had snapped years ago, leaving behind only rage and violence. But Dawn Brancheau knew absolutely none of this crucial history. SeaWorld's legal team had successfully hidden Tilikum's true murderous nature behind millions of dollars in corporate spin, legal settlements, and non-disclosure agreements. They had deliberately convinced their most trusting and beloved trainer to work intimately with their most dangerous and unpredictable animal. February 24, 2010 started exactly like any other ordinary day at SeaWorld. Dawn arrived early with her usual bright smile, genuinely excited for another Dine with Shamu show. She had no possible way of knowing she was walking directly into an elaborate death trap that had been 27 years in the making. She had no idea that Tilikum had been patiently waiting for this perfect moment of vulnerability. But the most disturbing and horrifying part of this nightmare was still coming. The Dine with Shamu experience was SeaWorld's most intimate and expensive attraction. While wealthy families enjoyed gourmet lunch, they could watch expert trainers interact with massive orcas through crystal-clear underwater viewing windows. It was marketed as pure magic, peaceful bonding between human and nature, completely safe. Dawn had performed this exact show literally hundreds of times over her 16-year career. She knew every single beat, every choreographed trick, every safety protocol by heart. But on this particular day, something felt disturbingly different. Tilikum seemed unusually agitated and unpredictable during the performance. He missed his trained cues repeatedly. He completely ignored her familiar commands. Other experienced trainers noticed the dangerous change immediately. "Something's really off with Tilly today," one whispered nervously to a colleague. But the expensive show had to continue for the paying customers. After the main performance ended to polite applause, Dawn stayed behind alone for what SeaWorld euphemistically called a relationship session. An intimate, private bonding time between trainer and whale designed to strengthen their emotional connection. This was when Dawn felt most alive and connected to her beloved orcas. She lay casually on her stomach at the pool's concrete edge, her long blonde ponytail draped carelessly over the water's surface. Her bare feet dangled playfully in the cool water as she gently rubbed Tilikum's scarred and massive head with both hands. She whispered to him in the soft, loving voice she reserved exclusively for her favorite animals. "Good boy, Tilly. You're such a good boy. I love you so much." Dozens of families were still finishing their expensive lunches just 20 feet away, completely unaware of the building danger. Young children pressed their innocent faces against the thick glass barriers, absolutely amazed by the beautiful woman and the enormous whale. To them, it looked exactly like a magical fairy tale come to life. But fairy tales don't exist in concrete prison tanks. Without any warning whatsoever, without any apparent provocation, Tilikum struck with calculated violence. His massive jaws, powerful enough to crush a small car, clamped down brutally on Dawn's left arm and shoulder. In one lightning-fast, violent motion, he yanked her entire body into the freezing pool. The crystal-clear water exploded in pure chaos and terror. Dawn's desperate scream was cut short immediately, as Tilikum dragged her 30 feet down into the crushing depths of his concrete prison. In the suffocating darkness below, the psychotic whale began his deadly, twisted game. He shook her fragile human body like a dog playing with a chew toy. Her bones cracked audibly, her body twisted and bent at impossible, sickening angles. Above the surface, horrified witnesses couldn't comprehend the nightmare they were witnessing. Young children started screaming and crying hysterically. Panicked adults were frantically calling 911 on their cell phones. SeaWorld staff members ran in every direction, shouting emergency commands and activating rarely used crisis protocols. But everyone knew it was already far too late. Tilikum held Dawn's limp body underwater for minutes that felt like hours to the traumatized witnesses. When he finally surfaced, her completely lifeless form was clenched tightly in his blood-stained jaws, like a trophy. Bright red blood stained the once crystal-clear water in expanding clouds. Her golden ponytail floated grotesquely like seaweed. "Oh my God!" someone screamed in absolute horror. "She's not moving, she's dead." The desperate rescue attempt quickly became a nightmare within a nightmare. Tilikum absolutely refused to release Dawn's body, no matter what the emergency teams tried. He swam in slow, deliberate circles around his tank, carrying his human prize like a warrior displaying his conquest. Frantic emergency teams tried absolutely everything they could think of. Nets, food rewards, commands from other trainers, loud noises, bright lights. Nothing worked at all. The massive, psychotic whale was in complete and total control of the situation. For nearly 40 agonizing minutes, Tilikum played with Dawn's corpse, while dozens of traumatized people watched helplessly from above. He held her by the neck, by the waist, by the legs. He took her to the deepest part of the pool and brought her back to the surface. He paraded her lifeless body around his tank like she was his personal possession. Because in his twisted, broken mind, she was exactly that. Finally, completely desperate staff members made the decision to begin emergency draining of the entire pool. As the water level dropped dramatically, Tilikum was forced into an increasingly smaller space with nowhere to hide. Only then, when he had no other choice, did he reluctantly release his precious victim. Dawn Brancheau was pulled from the bloody water at exactly 3:08 p.m. She had been clinically dead for over 30 minutes, but paramedics still attempted CPR. The official autopsy would later reveal the complete extent of the unspeakable horror. Dawn had suffered massive, catastrophic trauma to her head, neck, and torso. Multiple ribs were fractured. Her cervical vertebrae were violently dislocated. Her scalp was completely torn away from her skull. The gentle, loving woman who had dedicated her entire life to caring for orcas had been brutalized beyond all recognition. But perhaps the most chilling detail discovered by investigators was that Dawn had actually drowned. She was still fully conscious and aware when Tilikum first dragged her underwater. She experienced every crushing bite, every violent shake, every moment of absolute terror before her lungs finally filled with water. Her last conscious thoughts were of the whale she had trusted completely with her life. The woman who loved orcas more than anything else in the world died knowing that love was not returned. Within hours of Dawn's brutal death, SeaWorld's crisis management team went into full damage control mode. They immediately began blaming the victim, falsely claiming that Dawn's long ponytail had somehow triggered Tilikum's natural predatory instincts. They called it a tragic freak accident, caused entirely by trainer error and poor judgment. But the traumatized witnesses told a completely different story. They clearly saw Tilikum grab Dawn's arm and shoulder first, not her hair. They witnessed a deliberate, calculated attack by a whale with a documented history of violence. Federal investigators later confirmed what many people already suspected. SeaWorld had deliberately lied about the circumstances surrounding Dawn's death. They had also criminally concealed the full extent of Tilikum's violent history from their own employees. Dawn's death became the catalyst for a global awakening about Orca captivity. Her sacrifice was not in vain. It ultimately led to the freedom of future generations of whales. But for Dawn Brancheau, that justice came too late. She paid the ultimate price for humanity's arrogance and greed.